everyone, it's Kay. I'll keep this one short. I'm sure we want to get right to the reading, but I'm back with chapter 2 of Limited Truth. And last we left, we were introduced to Cassie and a few of her friends, like Erin, her crush Braden, Jared, and Kara Allen. And we also met, the real bratty Kelsey Gibbons and kind of got a snippet of her daily life. And we left off that there was a big ruckus in her school hallway, and there was a banner saying, War Game XRI, your school, your honor, your duty. And she did not know what that meant. So, without further ado, here's chapter 2.
Chapter 2. As I stood there, I tried to figure out why there were kids practically having a riot below this sign. It was just a sign and it didn't say anything offensive. I mean, I was kidding myself if I didn't admit that this day in my sleepy, boring town was quickly becoming anything but dull. That, and I couldn't help but prickle with anxiety over the words, your duty. To have a duty meant there was something that you had to do, like jury duty or when people were drafted for the war all those years ago. In both of those instances, not doing your duty had severe consequences. Someone behind us complained that they had to get to class, but I was too nervous to tell them that we were all in the same boat. People pushed and the crowd lurched forward. Someone to my right fell. Kara stared at me with panic-stricken eyes, which I knew I must have had too. It was only a matter of time before someone was trampled. We were nearly at the edge of the office when its doors opened and our very tall principal came out. Mr. McCormick didn't look amused on a regular day, but today, when I stood on my tiptoes to get a better look, he looked like he had even less patience. His rusty-colored hair was disheveled and his mouth a tight, thin line before he bellowed, "Go to class!" making many people jump out of their skin. "What is War Game XRI?" someone pleaded. But Mr. McCormick just shook his head and demanded we go to class, saying the hallway was unsafe. The roar of protests got even louder, if possible. "Go to class, or I will start giving out suspensions," he screamed. The hallway traffic surged forward after that. As Kara and I passed him, I couldn't help but notice that his face was the most upset I'd seen yet. It made my teacher covering her mouth in shock look like nothing. I half expected him to scream hysterically and start running around. What was going on around here today? I grabbed Kara's hand tightly, and we pulled each other toward the music wing. I had never been so relieved to head into what I sometimes considered my sanctuary. Or I was until we walked through the door. Inside it was just as chaotic of a scene. No one had their instruments out and everyone was talking. Those students who had been in the hallway, filling in those who hadn't on the crimson banner. I fought the urge to cover my ears to drown out the noise. My poor teacher, Mr. Emanuel, looked like he tried to get some sense of order but had failed miserably. "Settle down," he called over the roar. "Please, settle down." Jared made his way across the room and Kara practically ran into his arms. Despite what she'd confessed to me earlier, I gave him a strong hug myself, happy for the comforting figure on this bizarre day. When I went to unlock my cage to retrieve my flute, I found myself struggling with the latch. My hands reminded me of my world history teachers. I hadn't realized how shaken I was until now. At that moment, Mr. Emanuel must have hit his breaking point, because he finally shouted at everyone to stop what they were doing and sit down. Most plopped into a seat empty-handed and attempted to listen, even though the room was thick with the panic that we were trying to swallow down. "What's going on?" I heard Braden's voice ask. "There's a banner in the hallway telling us that something is our duty. I'd like to know what." My music teacher looked like all the other adults I'd seen today, like he was utterly shell-shocked. "I'm just as confused as you are. All the teachers got an email today saying we are not to come in tomorrow. The school is being taken over by some company to put on a war simulation." My brain instantly thought of a Civil War reenactment. That would have been educational and a little weird, but not something for the teachers to panic about. Plus, wouldn't they want the staff there to help? That could certainly be a reason why the adults were freaking out. Mr. Emanuel must have printed the email out because he kept glancing at a piece of paper that was in his hands. "It's not like you think. Not like what the Sons of Liberty do a couple times a year out by the Poly Farm. It's futuristic. It's supposed to emulate a worst-case scenario where people would be called to arms." After the initial shock passed and a chorus of whats rang through the band room, Mr. Emanuel explained that the state of Delaware had been chosen to participate in the simulation called War Game XRI. It was federally mandated for all students in public school grades 9 through 12, to participate. Delaware had been chosen as the first location because we were the smallest state with only 20 high schools, but it was Emanuel's belief that all high schools across America would eventually participate, that the president signed it into motion because he felt society had made us soft. We were going to learn how to battle whether we liked it or not. "Hey, Cassie," Kara whispered. "You might have something to write about for your creative writing project after all." When asked for more details about the game itself, though, Mr. Emanuel had few answers. He claimed he and the other teachers had been researching it all day, but everything was very vague. It sounded like it might be a weird game of capture the flag, but all they could discern was that 2 schools participated at a time and that it was done inside a simulation that was deemed harmless. "We're really doing this?" Aaron asked from the other side of the room. "They're going to make us fight other kids, even though war has historically never been fought primarily by children?" Mr. Emanuel shrugged. "The government is trying to play it off as having the masses ready for anything. A mandate is serious, though. It's pretty much forcing you." "But we're band kids, E," a tuba-playing senior named Garrett implored, using our teacher's pet name. "Most of us suck at physical activity." The boy was almost always loud and outgoing. To see him so upset was unnerving. "Be that as it may, you have no choice but to participate," Mr. Emanuel continued to scan his paper. "On the bright side, it does say that it helps demonstrate which students work best under pressure, which ones work well with others, and who can be a champion. The last person standing wins all the glory, and—" he squinted at the paper. "If you win the whole deal, your school gets $1,000,000. "So this is some messed up way to get our schools money?" I heard someone ask. "I know education gets crap for a budget these days, but that's ridiculous." "Sounds more like a social experiment," Patrick replied from his spot in the trombone section. I thought about bringing up one of those dystopian novels that were all the rage, but I knew whatever I said wouldn't matter. Whatever this thing was, we were trapped with no way out. "I'm sorry, guys. I wish I could tell you more." "Anyone think this might actually be a good thing?" I was surprised when I heard Jared speak up. "Could you imagine what life would be like if we could win this? Not only would we earn respect, but imagine what we could use that $1,000,000 toward. People might appreciate music kids more if we get the glory." Jared's words were powerful and the opposite of most feelings in the room. I was certainly very sick of people like Kelsey Gibbons and those boys who knocked me down in the hall being mean to me because I wasn't the same as them. I would love for them to appreciate me for what I was worth or to leave me alone. At the moment, though, there were too many unknowns about this strange situation to rally behind my friend. "Now, why don't we try to return to some sense of normalcy by taking out—" Mr. Emanuel never got us back on track because at that moment the intercom went off and Mr. McCormick's even more agitated voice came over the loudspeaker. "Attention staff and students. It has been made very clear that there are many questions and concerns about Wargame XRI. Students will be receiving a pamphlet to bring home. Tomorrow the day will begin with an informative assembly after the first bell. That being said, you will not need your books as there will not be classes tomorrow. That is all." The thought of having a day of school where we wouldn't actually be doing our classes should have been cause for a celebration, but there were no cheers. The school was dead silent. Mr. Emanuel threw up his hands in defeat before he walked away from his conductor's stand into his adjacent office. We took that to mean that there would be no band, so we could do as we wished. Normally I would have used the break to get ahead on my homework, but now that nothing was due tomorrow, I didn't know what to do. "Do you want to ride home?" Aaron asked. "I'll drop you off at your bus stop so your mom won't get suspicious." I nodded vigorously, knowing that he was asking me because he was planning on leaving. I should have taken the bus, but I wanted to be as far away from this school and everything that had happened today as possible. I collected my things and snuck out the door with him before you could say caught cutting class. My mother was intense. I'm not exactly sure if it's because she was brought up with nearly no supervision and never wanted her own children to experience the same thing, or if it was because she had some sort of issue like obsessive compulsive disorder, but she was always micromanaging, overanalyzing, and complaining. I did share one of her traits, though. Our tempers were both incredibly short. I don't know how it leaked, but by the time Aaron and I had grabbed a cup of coffee at Java Jones, and he dropped me off at my street corner, the news of Wargame XRI was already all over the local news. My mother was glued to the TV as I let myself in. "This whole thing is utterly ridiculous," my mother snapped as she watched a reporter standing outside of Seton's Board of Education building. "If I wanted you in a military school, I would have sent you to one." I know, Mom, I called as I headed to my room to change into my tights and leotard. I'm not crazy about it either. I found I had the best luck when I just agreed with her. My mother wasn't done griping. What's next? Shane learning how to make landmines? My brother was still in the 7th grade at St. Lawrence and was too young to have to partake in this strange thing I was suddenly a part of. Since my mother was monopolizing the television, my sandy-haired brother had hauled himself up in his bedroom, playing a video game on his computer. I smiled, taking in the back of his head as I searched the clean laundry for a shawl and leg warmers. Shane would probably do well in Wargame XRI, but I didn't dare say so. I called your aunt. Do you know what they are I called your aunt. Do you know that they are doing this at George's school too? I was triple checking my bag now, making sure I had blister bandages and all the other things I need for a long rehearsal. I went to the kitchen to fill my water bottle, trying to keep my patience in check. It's federally mandated, Mom. Well, this president is a moron. They should impeach him for passing such a thing. At that point, I wanted the conversation to be over, so I told her I was ready and we headed toward her dark blue SUV. Once we were on our way, I pulled out the glossy pamphlet that Aaron had given me. Someone had been passing them out in the other academic building. I kept staring at it, hoping that I would understand it as more time passed, but no secret meanings came to me. Wargame XRI, your school, your honor, your duty. On the cover were a group of stoic-looking teenagers in black fatigues. The girls wore leggings and short black skirts and had their hair tied back. The uniform had extra padding in some places, but did not seem like a typical military uniform at all, and the kids looked more like supermodels than normal teenagers. I found myself heaving a sigh as I opened the pamphlet. There was a small paragraph justifying the simulation, saying that the world was a tumultuous place and how we must be ready for the future. The days of trench warfare were over. Wargame XRI would train us for the next wave of combat tactics. I cocked an eyebrow at that. There hadn't been trench warfare in a very long time. There was a frequently asked questions section that assured the simulation was harmless and that only severe handicaps were considered an excuse to not participate. I could only shudder at what the government and this corporation might think were acceptable limitations. The write-up also made a huge deal about the $1 million reward. Besides some fancy photographs, however, there was nothing more than what my band teacher had already told us. I tucked the pamphlet in my dance bag as I felt my mother turn into Rising Star's parking lot. My seatbelt was off before she'd come to a complete stop. She called for me to slow down, but the minute the car was in park, I was out the door, walking towards what I hoped would ease my mind. Unfortunately, I didn't find peace at ballet. Everyone was chatting nervously, which wasn't the norm, as we stretched and put on our shoes. My friend Heather was doing a split in front of the mirror when I sat down and tried to tie my toe shoes in place. She was a sophomore like Jared and sang in the choir that met in the class across the hall from band. In the show, she was going to be one of the featured dancers in the ensemble group that were flowers, snowflakes, mice, and other characters. I had been in a similar situation last year. She also was my understudy on the off chance that something happened and I couldn't be Clara. This is going to be a rough class. Miss Danae is going to flip. Sure enough, when our teacher came in and saw that no one was quiet or focused, she practically screamed at us to get to the bar. After we warmed up, Miss Danae wanted my partner and I to run our duet. I had many dances that I was responsible for, but our pas de deux was the most technical and complicated. It started off well enough, but it was obvious that my partner, the prince, was just as distracted as I was. We fumbled through sections, but it wasn't until I chassed over to him to pick me up in an elegant leap and he dropped me that my dance teacher finally lost it. The production opens in a month. This is horrible, she exclaimed. I'm sorry, Miss Danae, I said, staring at my point shoes. It's just I can't think straight with this war game thing hanging over my head. My partner didn't go to Setontown High, but being in Delaware, he'd be forced to participate in the strange exercise no matter which high school he attended. We launched into a whole account of everything that had happened to change our normally boring world. Miss Danae looked just as shocked and horrified as our school teachers had, but had us back to work nevertheless. While no one fell after that or had any major issues, I still felt the rehearsal had been a failure. Nobody's dancing was tight, and it was obvious all our minds were on other things. After I got home, I ate dinner and told my father everything that had happened. He told me he'd been informed by my mother, and we both had a quiet laugh over her typical behavior. I ended up doing my homework, even though it was no longer due, mostly because I had so much nervous energy I didn't know what else to do with myself. Finally, I decided to call Kara and see how she and Jared were doing. How's your family doing? I asked. Furious, Kara whispered. My mom called the school and threatened to keep me and Jared home. Kara paused. as if still in shock at what she was about to say. They said if my mom didn't take us to school tomorrow, the government would come to our house and get us anyway. Whoa. Oh, it gets even crazier. They said they would arrest my parents for withholding us. I wonder if my mother knows that, I replied, half joking. I wouldn't put it past her to try to physically barricade me in my room if she thought she could keep me safe by doing it. Jared heard on the bus that this whole thing is being funded by this group called the Chai Royota Corporation. Something about those words sounded familiar to me, but I couldn't figure out why. I was still trying to wrap my head around the fact that something this big and involving children could have been passed without the public knowing beforehand. I tried to ignore the shiver that crept up and down my spine. If the discovery of the game had been dramatic, how bad was the simulation itself going to be?
Okay, I'm going to stop it there today. As always, if you have any comments or predictions about what you think could happen, please go ahead and leave them below, and I'll have chapter 3 for you very soon. Bye.